Grant raised his champagne flute to the light, that blinding, charismatic grin fixed in place as the applause washed over him. He claimed the title of newest partner without a single glance in my direction. Despite the 80-hour weeks I had ground out to save our quarterly margins, he thought he had won the war for our legacy with a toast. He didn't realize that in 6 months, I would buy the entire company just to look him in the eye and fire him. The champagne in my glass was lukewarm, but I drank it anyway because it gave my hands something to do. The air in the banquet hall of the Briar Glen Country Club was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, murmuring hum of people who believed they were important. I stood near a pillar wrapped in white chiffon, my back aching in a way that had become permanent over the last 3 months. I was 33 years old, and I felt 50. The last quarter at Redwood Meridian Group had been a war of attrition. While the partners played golf and discussed vague concepts of synergy, I had been in the trenches of the procurement department, renegotiating contracts with steel suppliers who wanted to hike their prices by 15%. I had been the one walking the floor of our distribution center at 4 in the morning, convincing the shift supervisors that we could not approve overtime, but that I would personally fight for their bonus structure if they hit the shipment metrics. I had cut $200,000 in redundant software licensing fees alone. I had saved the quarter. The numbers were clean. The margins were healthy. Not because of a miracle, but because I had bled for them. So when the invitation for a surprise leadership announcement landed in my inbox, I allowed myself a moment of quiet, foolish hope. I thought, perhaps, that Malcolm Weller, the senior partner who had known me since I was a child, was finally going to acknowledge that the company stood on the foundation I had reinforced. My brother, Grant, tapped the microphone. The feedback squeal cut through the room, silencing the chatter. Grant stood on the raised platform, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. He looked like everything a leader was supposed to be in the glossy brochures. He was tall. His suit was tailored to within an inch of its life, and he had that easy, magnetic smile that made people want to agree with him before he had even finished a sentence. He was 3 years older than me, but he had the energy of a college athlete who had never lost a game. "Welcome, everyone," Grant said, his voice booming with practiced confidence. "It is incredible to see so many faces here tonight. We have had a challenging few months, but looking around this room, I see resilience. I see the future." He paused for effect, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on me. He smiled, a gesture that looked warm to everyone else but felt cold on my skin. "I want to thank my little sister, Bella," Grant said. A ripple of polite applause moved through the room. I straightened my posture, forcing a smile. "Bella is the engine room of Redwood Meridian," Grant continued, chuckling softly. "She is the one counting the paper clips and making sure the lights stay on. She is great at details, absolutely fantastic at the small stuff. But tonight is about looking up from the spreadsheets. Tonight is about vision." The backhanded compliment landed like a physical blow. Great at details, not vision. It was the box they had been trying to shove me into for a decade. The useful girl, the diligent worker, the one you trusted with the keys but not the strategy. Grant turned toward Malcolm Weller, who stood beaming beside him. "And that is why I am humbled," Grant said, his voice dropping to a register of mock humility, "to announce that Malcolm and the board have invited me to join the table as the newest partner of Redwood Meridian Group." The room erupted. The applause was thunderous. I stood frozen, my hands gripping the stem of my glass so hard I thought the crystal might snap. Partner. Grant had spent the last quarter charming clients at dinners while I was firing underperforming vendors. He had spent his afternoons playing squash with Malcolm while I was auditing the logistics chain. And now, he was a partner. "Thank you," Grant shouted over the applause. "This is just the beginning. With our new lender relationship and the expansion capital we have secured, we are going to take this company to places we never dreamed of." The applause surged again, but I stopped hearing it. My mind snagged on his words. New lender relationship, expansion capital. My stomach turned over. That was impossible. I was the director of operations. I signed off on every vendor payment, every capital expenditure request, and every budget adjustment. We were currently under a strict spending freeze. I had denied a request for new ergonomic chairs for the accounting department just yesterday because we were cash conscious. If there was new financing, if there was expansion capital, I would have seen the due diligence paperwork. I would have seen the bank auditors walking the floor. I watched Grant shaking hands, clapping men on the back, basking in the adoration. He was lying, or he was hiding something massive. I felt a hand on my elbow. It was my mother, Elaine. She was wearing a silver dress that caught the light, her face flushed with the vicarious triumph of her golden child. "Isn't it wonderful?" she whispered, squeezing my arm. "Your brother worked so hard for this, Bella." I looked at her, searching for any sign that she understood what had just happened. That Grant had just publicly diminished my entire career to counting paperclips. He said, "We have a new lender." "Mom," I said, my voice tight, "I don't know anything about a new lender." Elaine's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Don't start. Bella, just be supportive. This is a big night for the family. We need to show a united front. You know how hard Grant is on himself. He needs this win." "He needs this win?" I asked, the bitterness leaking out. "I saved the profit margin this quarter, and we are all very proud of you," Elaine said, dismissing me with a pat on the cheek. "But tonight is Grant's night. Don't spoil it with your technicalities. Go give him a hug." She pushed me gently toward the stage. I looked around for my father. Howard. He was standing near the bar, swirling the ice in his scotch. He wasn't looking at Grant, and he certainly wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched. I walked over to him. "Dad?" He jumped, startled, and looked up. His eyes were watery. "Oh, Bella. Quite a party, isn't it?" he said, his voice overly loud. "Dad, did you know about this?" I asked. "The partnership? The new money?" Howard looked away, focusing intently on a waiter passing with a tray of crab cakes. "Malcolm and Grant. They have been talking," he muttered. "Business evolves. Bella, you know that. We have to adapt." He wouldn't meet my gaze. My father, who had founded the company 40 years ago before selling the majority stake to Malcolm, looked like a ghost in his own life. He knew. They had all known. I was the only one standing in the dark. I did not hug Grant. I left the party 20 minutes later, driving home in silence, the radio off, the hum of the tires on the asphalt, the only sound in the world. The retribution began on Tuesday. Monday had been quiet, a tense silence hanging over the office like the drop in pressure before a tornado. But on Tuesday morning, I tried to log into the approval portal to sign off on the weekly vendor run, and the screen flashed red. Access denied, insufficient privileges. I frowned and typed my password again. Access denied. I picked up the phone and dialed IT. "Hey, this is Bella." I said when the technician answered, "I am locked out of the payment approval system. Can you reset me?" There was a long pause on the other end. Ms. Morgan," the technician said, his voice nervous. "I can't do that. The ticket came from the executive suite. Your permissions were updated this morning." "Updated to what?" I asked. "Read only," he said. I hung up the phone. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I walked out of my office and straight down the hall to the payroll department. I needed to see Tessa Nguyen. Tessa had been with Redwood Meridian for 15 years. She was the kind of payroll supervisor who knew everyone's birthday and exactly how much vacation time they had accrued down to the minute. She was also one of the few people in the building I trusted explicitly. When I walked in, Tessa jumped. She looked at the door, then back at me, her face pale. "Bella," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here. What is going on?" "Tessa?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "I have been locked out of payments." Tessa stood up and closed her office door. She moved around her desk and lowered her voice to a barely audible hush. "They moved your signature authority," she said. "It went to Grant's office manager, Sarah. As of this morning, Sarah is the final approver for all operational expenses up to $50,000. Sarah? I repeated, incredulous. Sarah is an administrative assistant. She doesn't know a capital expenditure from a catering bill. I know, Tessa said, wringing her hands. But there is a memo coming out at noon. They are calling it a restructuring. I felt the floor tilting beneath me. This wasn't just a snub, this was a coup. The memo hit my inbox at 11:58 a.m. It was from Malcolm Weller. Subject: Streamlining our leadership structure team. In an effort to align our operational goals with our new strategic vision, we are streamlining our approval processes, effective immediately. Bella Morgan will be transitioning into a new role as Director of Special Projects. In this capacity, she will focus on high-level research and long-term strategy, freeing her from the day-to-day administrative burdens of the operations department. Special projects. In the corporate world, that was code for, "We can't fire you yet, so we are going to put you in a room and hope you quit." I didn't quit. I walked into Malcolm Weller's office. Malcolm was sitting behind his mahogany desk, looking for all the world like a benevolent grandfather. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Bella, come in, he said. "I assume you saw the announcement." I sat down, keeping my back straight. "I did. Malcolm, you stripped my team. You took away my signature authority. You have put me in a role that doesn't exist." Malcolm sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Bella, you are burning the candle at both ends. We have all seen it. You are intense. The staff finds you demanding. I am demanding because I am doing the job of 3 people. I said, I saved us $2 million this quarter, and we appreciate that," Malcolm said, his voice soothing and patronizing. "But you are tired. You are emotional. Look at you now. You are shaking." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Just slightly. Rage, not fear. "This isn't about my health." "Malcolm," I said, "Grant announced a new lender. Where is that money coming from? Why was I cut out of the loop?" Malcolm put his glasses back on. "Grant is the partner now, Bella. He has brought in new relationships. You don't need to worry about the finance side anymore. We want you to take a step back. Take a wellness leave if you need to. Spend some time at the lake house. Let us handle the heavy lifting." He was gaslighting me. He was taking my competence, wrapping it in a narrative of instability, and serving it back to me as concern. I stood up. "I will not be taking a leave," I said. Malcolm shrugged. "Suit yourself. But your office is being moved to the 3rd floor. We need your current space for the expansion team." The 3rd floor was storage. It was where we kept the old filing cabinets and the surplus toner cartridges. I spent the next 3 days moving my things into a windowless office that smelled of dust and old carpet. I had no staff. My phone didn't ring. I sat at a desk that was too small, staring at a laptop that had no access to the systems I had built. But they had forgotten one thing. I was good at details. On Thursday afternoon, Tessa found me in the parking lot. She looked terrified. She was holding a manila envelope, pressing it against her chest like a shield. "Bella," she said, her voice shaking. "I found something." She handed me the envelope. I opened it inside my car. It contained copies of 3 invoices. They were for a company called Northline Advisory. The descriptions were generic: strategic consulting services, process optimization, management retainer. The amounts were staggering: $15,000, $22,000, $18,000, all dated within the last 2 weeks. "I don't know who they are," Tessa whispered, leaning in through the open window. "We don't have a contract with them." I checked the vendor master list. They were added the morning after the party. "Who approved these?" I asked. "Sarah did," Tessa said. "But here is the weird part. The reimbursement code isn't an operations code. It is routing through a suspense account that usually clears out at the end of the month. It bypasses the department budget reports." "Thank you." "Tessa," I said, "you need to go. Don't let anyone see you talking to me." She nodded and hurried away toward her car. I drove home, my mind racing. Northline Advisory. It sounded like a shell company. It sounded like a drain. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of red wine and the stack of old company records I kept in my personal safe. I had copies of the chart of accounts, the legacy system codes, and the old vendor protocols from when my father ran the place. I pulled up the photo I had taken of the invoices Tessa gave me. I looked at the coding string at the bottom of the page. GL-8809-X. I ran my finger down the old chart of accounts. 8809. There it was. Executive Discretionary Allocation. It was a code that hadn't been used in 5 years. It was designed for confidential payments, legal settlements, sensitive acquisitions, things that needed to be kept off the general ledger until the auditors came in at year-end. Grant and Malcolm were using an executive override code to funnel nearly $50,000 in 2 weeks to a vendor that nobody knew. For services that were too vague to verify, and by stripping my authority, they had ensured I wouldn't see it on the standard reports. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just office politics. This was malfeasance. My first instinct was to storm into Grant's office and throw the papers on his desk. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to drag my father in and force him to look at what his son was doing. But then I remembered Malcolm's voice. You are emotional. You are intense. If I went in there now, shouting about fraud without the full picture, they would fire me. They would say I was hysterical. They would claim Northline was a legitimate consultant and that I was paranoid. They would bury me. I took a sip of wine. It tasted sour. No, I would not give them the satisfaction of an outburst. I opened my laptop. I created a new folder, password protected and encrypted. I named it Recipes. I started typing. Date: October 14th. Event: Leadership announcement. Anomaly: Mention of undisclosed financing. Date: October 16th. Event: Removal of signature authority. Anomaly: Transfer to unqualified personnel. Date: October 18th. Event: Discovery of Northline advisory invoices. Anomaly: Use of legacy executive codes to bypass review. I was going to document everything, every email, every snub, every suspicious invoice Tessa could slip to me. I would build a wall of evidence so high and so thick that when I finally pushed it over, it would crush them. I worked until 2 a.m. My eyes were burning, but my mind was clear for the first time in weeks. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the investigator. I was just closing my laptop when a notification chimed on my phone. It was a calendar invite sent to my personal email address. That was strange. Nobody used my personal email for work. I opened it. Subject: Transition meeting, date: tomorrow, 9 a.m. Location: Conference Room B, the small one near the freight elevator. Attendees: Bella Morgan, Grant Morgan, Malcolm Weller, and one other name I didn't recognize. Jonah Pierce, Lakefront Commonwealth Bank. I stared at the screen. Lakefront Commonwealth Bank. We banked with Chase. We had banked with Chase for 20 years. Grant's voice echoed in my memory. New lender relationship. They weren't just stealing money through a fake consultant. They were leveraging the company. They were borrowing against the assets I had spent my life protecting. I accepted the invite. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment. They thought they had sidelined me. They thought they had put the detail-obsessed little sister in a box where she couldn't hurt them. They were about to find out exactly how dangerous details could be. Conference Room B was the architectural equivalent of a timeout corner. It was a windowless box tucked behind the freight elevator, usually reserved for disciplinary hearings or vendor disputes that nobody wanted to witness. The air conditioner hummed with a rattling, mechanical cough, and the fluorescent light overhead flickered every 30 seconds like a nervous tick. I arrived exactly at 9 a.m. Grant and Malcolm were already there, seated on one side of the scuffed laminate table. Opposite them sat a man I did not know, a man who looked like he had been born wearing a gray suit and a skeptical expression. Grant looked up as I entered. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Bella," he said. "Glad you could make it. Pull up a chair." I sat at the far end of the table, creating a deliberate distance. Malcolm cleared his throat. Bella, this is Jonah Pierce from Lakefront Commonwealth Bank. Malcolm said, Jonah, this is Bella Morgan, our director of special projects. The title tasted like ash in my mouth. I nodded to Jonah. Nice to meet you, I said. Jonah Pierce adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at me with the intensity of a man searching for a rounding error in a spreadsheet. Ms. Morgan, he said. His voice was dry, precise. I understand you have been handling the operational transitions? I paused. I had not been handling anything. I had been sitting in a storage closet staring at a blank wall, but I sensed a trap. If I said I was out of the loop, I looked incompetent. If I lied, I was complicit. I am aware of the operational landscape. I said carefully, Excellent, Jonah said. He opened a thick leather binder. We are finalizing the amended credit facility to support the expansion capital. As part of the covenant structure, we need to certify the leadership continuity. The bank is comfortable extending the line of credit based on the new ownership structure. Provided the operational metrics hold steady, I kept my face perfectly still, a mask of professional boredom, while my internal organs seemed to drop through the floor. New ownership structure, Jonah continued, flipping a page. Specifically, with Grant taking over the majority equity position and the controlling interest, we need to ensure that the key man insurance policies are updated to reflect his value to the enterprise. Grant shifted in his seat. Jonah, he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. We can handle the insurance details with HR. Bella doesn't need to be bored with the administrative minutiae. Jonah did not look at Grant. He looked at me. Actually, Jonah said, I have a question regarding the inventory turnover ratios. Since the collateral for the loan is largely asset-based, and Ms. Morgan was previously the director of operations, I need to confirm that the valuation of the raw materials in the warehouse matches the figures submitted in the restructuring plan. He slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. It was a valuation summary. I looked at the number at the bottom. $4 million. My eyes snapped up to Jonah's. 4 million? I asked. Is that figure accurate? Jonah asked. I looked at Grant. He was staring at me, his jaw set, a silent warning broadcasting from his eyes. Play along. If I told the truth, that our raw material inventory was closer to 2.5 million, I would blow up the loan right here. Jonah would close his binder, walk out, and the expansion capital would vanish. Grant would be humiliated. But if I confirmed it, I was committing bank fraud. I pushed the paper back toward Jonah. The inventory fluctuates based on seasonal demand, I said, choosing my words with surgical precision. I have not reviewed the physical count for this month. As my role has shifted, however, a $4 million valuation would represent a significant, unprecedented spike in our holding capacity. Jonah's eyes narrowed behind his lenses. He heard it. Unprecedented. Significant. I see, Jonah said. He made a small note in the margin of his paper. Grant laughed. A nervous, barking sound. Bella is conservative. She likes to keep the estimates low. Under-promise and over-deliver, right? Jonah did not smile. He looked at Grant. Mr. Morgan, the bank prefers accuracy over conservatism. He turned back to his binder. One final item. The covenant requires updated ownership documentation. We have the letter of intent regarding the partnership transfer, but I am still missing the executed stock certificates and the board resolution finalizing the transfer of the 51% stake from Malcolm Weller to yourself. I need those before we can fund on Friday. 51%. Malcolm spoke up then, his voice smooth as warm syrup. The legal team is finalizing the minutiae. Jonah, you know how lawyers are? We will have the packet to you by close of business Thursday. Jonah closed the binder. He stood up. See that you do, he said. The credit committee is very specific about the chain of title. If there is ambiguity about who owns the company, there is no loan. He nodded to me. Ms. Morgan? He walked out. The door clicked shut, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Grant exhaled. A long, whistling breath. He loosened his tie. God, Grant said, auditors are such buzzkills. I stood up slowly. 51%? I asked. Grant waved a hand dismissively. It is a structure, Bella. Just a structure to get the financing. Malcolm is still the senior partner, but the bank thinks you own it. I said, you just sat there and let him believe you have 51% of the stock. It is a transition, Malcolm said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. Grant is the future. We are papering it to reflect that. Don't get hung up on the technicalities. Technicalities? I asked. It is fraud. Malcolm, if you don't actually transfer the shares, you are lying to a federally chartered bank. Grant stood up and leaned over the table. Invading my space, you are out of your depth. Bella, he said, his voice low and cold. This is high finance. This is how the big boys play. You count the boxes in the warehouse. Let us worry about how to pay for them. I looked at him. I looked at the brother I had defended on playgrounds, the brother I had tutored in math, the brother I had covered for when he missed deadlines. I don't think you are playing. Grant, I said, I think you are gambling. I turned and walked out before he could answer. I went straight to human resources. The HR department was located on the second floor, a carpeted maze of cubicles that smelled of stale coffee and fear. I walked to the filing room at the back, where the corporate records were kept in fireproof cabinets. I needed to see the capitalization table. The cap table listed every shareholder and exactly how much of the company they owned. If Grant really had 51%, it would be there. If he didn't, the current table would prove he was lying to the bank. I reached for the handle of the cabinet, locked. I pulled my keyring from my pocket. I had a master key. I had possessed a master key for 7 years. I slid the key into the lock. It didn't turn. Can I help you? I turned around. It was Linda, the HR director. She was standing with her arms crossed, looking uncomfortable. I need the cap table. Linda, I said, and the partnership agreement. My key isn't working. Linda bit her lip. She looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, anywhere but at me. We changed the locks over the weekend. She said, security protocol. Okay, I said. Can you open it for me? I can't. Bella. Why not? Linda sighed. The files you are asking for. They were moved. Moved where? To legal, she said. Malcolm ordered all ownership documents and executive contracts to be transferred to his personal legal counsel's office. They are not in the building anymore. I stared at her. And my access? You are no longer in the executive circle. Bella, Linda said softly. I am sorry. I was told that if you asked for these specific files, I was to refer you to Malcolm. Exclusion. It wasn't just a snub anymore. It was a blockade. I walked back to my office, my storage closet. I closed the door and sat in the dark for a long time. They had walled me off. They controlled the money, the records, and the narrative. I needed a weapon. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. It was a friend from college, a guy named David who worked in intellectual property. David, I said when he answered, I need a referral. I need a corporate shark. Someone who eats glass for breakfast and doesn't care about the Briar Glen Country Club social hierarchy. He gave me a name, Mara Klein. Klein Surratt was located in the city, an hour away from the insular, gossip-fueled bubble of Briar Glen. Mara Klein's office was on the 40th floor, a sanctuary of glass and steel that overlooked the gray expanse of Lake Erie. Mara was small, sharp-featured, and terrifyingly efficient. She did not offer me coffee. She did not ask about my day. She sat behind a desk that had exactly 1 pen on it and listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. When I finished explaining the situation, the demotion, the Northline invoices, the bank meeting, the locked files, Mara leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. So, she said, her voice was raspy, like she smoked a pack a day, though the office was pristine. You want to sue them? I want to stop them. I said, they are going to destroy the company. Mara nodded slowly. If we sue now, they will fire you for cause. They will claim you are disgruntled and stealing trade secrets. They will bury you in litigation fees until you are bankrupt. Then what do? I asked. We get leverage. Mara said, we don't scream. We don't hack into their emails. Do not do that. By the way, if you hack them, I walk. I don't do criminal defense. We need paper. Legitimate paper. She opened a notepad. You said you have been there since the beginning. Mara said, 10 years. I said, did you ever get equity? She asked. I shook my head. No, it is a partnership. My father owned it. Then he sold to Malcolm. Grant is becoming a partner now. I was always just an employee, a director. Mara frowned. 10 years. Director level, family business, and no equity? That is unusual, even for a family that plays favorites. She tapped her pen on the desk. Go home, Bella. Dig through every piece of paper you have from your hiring date. Offer letters, employee handbooks, bonus agreements. Look for the word vesting. Look for phantom stock. Look for profit interest. I went home. I tore my home office apart. I had boxes of old files in the attic. I sat on the floor, surrounded by dust motes, sifting through a decade of my life, performance reviews, Christmas cards, pay stubs. At midnight, I found it. It was stuck to the back of my original offer letter, the one I had signed when I was 23 years old. It was a single page, printed on the old company letterhead. Restricted Unit Grant Agreement. It stated that Bella Morgan was granted a 5% interest in the operating entity, vesting over 10 years, contingent upon continuous service. I stared at the paper. I remembered this. My father had given it to me with a wink, saying it was a little nest egg. I had signed it. He had signed it. But had it ever been recorded? I had never received a distribution. I had never been invited to a shareholder meeting. I had assumed it was symbolic, or that it had been nullified when Malcolm bought the majority stake. I took a picture of it and sent it to Mara. Her reply came 3 minutes later. It is messy. It is not notarized, but it is a contract. If you have been there 10 years, you are fully vested. 5% implies you have rights. You have a right to inspect the books. You have a right to object to dilution. It is a toehold. A toehold. It was all I needed. The next day, I called Denise Harrow. Denise was a legend at Redwood Meridian. She had been the original VP of Operations, the woman who taught me how to read a logistics manifest. She had retired abruptly 3 years ago. The official story was that she wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town. Denise looked different, relaxed, wearing a floral blouse instead of her trademark navy blazer, but her eyes were still sharp. She listened as I laid it out, the Northline invoices, the bank fraud, the way Malcolm was maneuvering Grant into the spotlight. When I finished, Denise sighed and stirred her tea. I wondered when he would do it to you. She said quietly, Do what? I asked. The squeeze, Denise said. Malcolm has a pattern. Bella. He finds a show pony, someone who looks good in a suit, someone who can tell a story. He pumps them up, gives them a fancy title, and then he uses them to attract money. But he hates operations people. He hates the people who know where the bodies are buried. Is that why you left? I asked. Denise nodded. He started overriding my safety protocols to save money. He wanted to boost the EBITDA before evaluation. I told him he was going to get someone killed. He told me I lacked commercial vision. She reached across the table and covered my hand. He is doing it again. Bella. He is using Grant to get this loan. Grant is the shiny object. The bank looks at Grant and sees energy and youth. They don't look at the rotting foundation. But why? I asked. Why risk everything for a loan? Because Malcolm is broke, Denise said. I stared at her. What? He made some bad bets in real estate? Denise said. Personal bets. He is leveraged to his eyeballs. He needs to pull cash out of the company to cover his personal debts. That is why they are doing this recapitalization. It is not for expansion. It is a cash out. The pieces clicked into place. The sudden urgency, the spending freeze, the pressure on the bank. Malcolm was gutting the company to save himself, and he was using Grant's ego as the vehicle to do it. And Grant? I asked. Does he know? Grant sees what he wants to see. Denise said, he sees the title. He sees the corner office. He doesn't see that he is the bag holder. When this crashes, Malcolm will be gone. And Grant will be the one standing there holding the personal guarantees. I needed to prove the money flow. Tessa had given me the Northline advisory invoices, but I needed to know where the money was going. I spent 2 nights searching public records databases. Northline Advisory was an LLC registered in Delaware, which meant the owners were anonymous, dead end. But the invoices had a remittance address, a P.O. box in Alder Creek, Indiana. Alder Creek was a tiny town. 3 hours away. I searched the Indiana Secretary of State Business Entity search. Nothing for Northline, but then I searched the address itself. The P.O. box was registered to a strip mall. I used Google Maps to look at the strip mall. There was a mailbox store, a dry cleaner, and a registered agent service called Hoosier Corporate Services. I searched for other businesses registered to that agent, and there it was, a filing from 2 years ago for a company called GM Ventures, LLC. The GM stood for Grant Morgan. I pulled the filing. The manager was listed as Grant Morgan. The address for the manager was Grant's condo in Briar Glen. Grant had set up a shell company in Indiana. He was billing Redwood Meridian through Northline, which was likely a DBA or a subsidiary of GM Ventures. He wasn't just the bag holder. He was skimming. He was stealing from the company he claimed to own. I printed the documents. My hands were cold. This was for cause. This was termination. This was prison. On Friday morning, Grant found me in the break room. I was making coffee, staring at the black liquid dripping into the pot. "Bella," he said. I turned. He was leaning against the door frame, his arms crossed. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. He looked tired, the corners of his eyes tight. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" I asked. "About your future," he said. He walked over and poured himself a cup of coffee. He stood too close to me. It was a dominance move. "Look, Bella," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know you are unhappy. I know the transition has been rough." "Rough?" I asked. "You locked me out of the building systems." "Grant, it is for your own good," he said. "You were stressing out. You were obsessing." He took a sip of coffee. "I want you safe. Bella, I want you taken care of." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I talked to Malcolm," Grant said. "We put together a package." He handed it to me. I opened it. It was a separation agreement. It offered me 6 months of severance, full health benefits for a year, a glowing letter of recommendation, and a release of all claims, a comprehensive non-disparagement clause, and a resignation letter, effective immediately, citing personal health reasons. If I signed this, I walked away with $50,000 and my silence. If I signed this, my 5% equity claim, my toehold, vanished. "This is a lot of money," Grant said gently. "You could take some time off, go to Europe, reset." I looked at the paper. It was a bribe. It was a golden handcuffs deal to get me out of the building before the bank loan closed. "I can't sign this, Grant," I said. Grant's face hardened. The mask slipped. The concern evaporated, replaced by a sneer I hadn't seen since we were teenagers fighting over the remote control. "Don't be stupid." "Bella," he said, "I am not being stupid. I am being careful. I need to have my lawyer review this." "You don't need a lawyer," Grant snapped. "This is family. We are trying to help you. You are trying to silence me," I said. Grant stepped closer. He lowered his voice, but the venom was clear. "You are not built for this, Bella. You are not built for the big table. You think you are smart because you can balance a ledger? That is arithmetic. Business is about power. It is about guts. You are weak." I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. "Is that what Malcolm tells you?" I asked. "That I'm weak?" Grant laughed. A cruel sound. "Mom agrees. You know, she thinks you are unstable. She thinks you are going to embarrass us. She is siding with stability. Bella. She is siding with the winners." The mention of my mother felt like a knife in the ribs, but I didn't let him see me bleed. I handed the envelope back to him. "I will think about it." I said, "Take the weekend," Grant said, shoving the envelope back into my hand. But the offer expires Monday at 9. If you don't sign it by then, we terminate you for insubordination, and then you get nothing." He walked out, leaving me standing in the smell of burnt coffee. I went straight to Mara's office. I showed her the separation agreement. She scanned it and laughed. "Standard intimidation," she said. "They are terrified. If they weren't, they would have just fired you." She tossed the agreement onto her desk. "But I have something better," Mara said. She turned her monitor so I could see it. It was an email chain. "This came in an hour ago," Mara said. "It was sent to the general inbox at my firm. The sender is a junior associate at a law firm in New York. He meant to send it to Malcolm's lawyer, but he auto-completed the wrong address. He sent it to Klein instead of Kleinman." I leaned in. It was a draft term sheet. Subject: Project Redwood / Rookfeld, Capital Acquisition Proposal Buyer. Rookfeld Capital, Target. Redwood Meridian Group, Structure. Management-led buyout. I read the terms. Rookfeld was a private equity firm known for distressed assets. They weren't investing in the company, they were financing a buyout. Grant and Malcolm were borrowing money to buy the company from the other passive shareholders, likely my father's remaining silent shares and a few cousins. They were going to take it private, load it with debt, and then flip it. But there was a line item on page 3 that made my blood run cold. Management Incentive Pool. Upon closing, Grant Morgan shall receive a success fee of $2 million, a payout. Grant wasn't just trying to be a partner. He was selling us out. He was going to let a vulture firm strip the company for parts, fire half the staff, and walk away with $2 million while the business my father built collapsed under the debt. Mara looked at me. "They aren't expanding, Bella. They are liquidating." I looked at the screen. I saw the faces of the warehouse workers. I saw Tessa in payroll. I saw the legacy my father was too tired to protect. "They think I am weak," I said softly. I looked at Mara. "Tell me what we need to do to kill this deal." The term sheet on Mara's monitor glowed with a kind of radioactive malice. I stared at the words, piecing together the financial architecture of my family's destruction. It was not a sale. It was an execution. Rookfeld Capital was not buying Redwood Meridian Group to grow it. They were backing a management-led recapitalization. In plain English, they were lending Grant and Malcolm enough money to buy out the passive shareholders, my father, the cousins, and potentially me, using the company's own assets as collateral. Once they controlled the equity, they would pay themselves a massive special dividend, essentially looting the cash reserves, and leave the company saddled with debt service payments that would strangle our cash flow for a decade. "It is a vampire deal," Mara said, lighting a cigarette she did not intend to smoke, just holding it like a talisman. "They suck the equity out, pay themselves a success fee, and leave the carcass to rot. If the company survives the debt payments, they win. If it goes bankrupt in 2 years, they have already made their money on the fees. Grant gets $2 million. I said, the number feeling heavy on my tongue. He sells the company down the river, and he gets a bonus, and Malcolm gets to cash out his majority stake at an inflated valuation before the house of cards collapses," Mara added. "They are leveraging the firm's legacy to pay for their exit." I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked gray and indifferent below. "They need a clean balance sheet to close this," I said. "They need the bank to sign off on the new covenant structure. That is why they needed me gone. I would have flagged the debt ratio, and that is why they are rushing." Mara said, "High-yield debt is expensive. Every day they wait. The interest clock ticks. They need to close by Friday." I turned back to her. "We are not going to let them close," I said. I met Jonah Pierce at 6 o'clock the next morning at a coffee shop 3 towns over. It was a place frequented by long-haul truckers, not bank auditors. The fluorescent lights buzzed with the same frequency as my anxiety. Jonah was sitting in a back booth, nursing a black coffee. He looked tired. He did not look like a man who enjoyed clandestine meetings. "I appreciate you coming," I said, sliding into the booth opposite him. Jonah didn't look up. "I am not here," he said. "If anyone asks, I am at the gym." "Understood," I said. Jonah took a sip of his coffee. He set the mug down with a deliberate clink. "I cannot help you, Ms. Morgan," he said. "My duty is to the bank. My duty is to risk mitigation. I cannot give you internal documents. I cannot delay a closing based on hearsay. I know." I said, "I am not asking for favors. I am asking for clarity. What does the bank need to see to stop a loan?" Jonah looked at me then. His eyes were intelligent, behind the wall of professional detachment. "The bank relies on 3 pillars," Jonah said. "Verified ownership, clean, audited financials, and a certification of no material adverse change. That includes an absence of related party fraud or litigation." He paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. "If, hypothetically," he continued, "there were questions regarding the legitimacy of the collateral. Say, if the inventory values were inflated, or if the accounts payable were being manipulated through undisclosed vendors, the credit committee would have to pause. They are risk-averse. They hate surprises." He pulled a napkin from the dispenser and flattened it on the table. "Also," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "the bank requires that all guarantors have clear title to the equity they are pledging. If there is a dispute over who actually owns the shares, the bank cannot take a lien. You cannot mortgage a house if your sister's name is still on the deed." He pushed the napkin toward me. It was blank. The message was in what he hadn't written. "Thank you." "Jonah," I said. He stood up, buttoned his coat, and walked out without looking back. I had my roadmap. I needed to prove the fraud. And I needed to prove my ownership. I had to turn the transition into a disputed mess that no risk officer would touch. Tessa Nguyen met me in the parking lot of a grocery store during her lunch break. She looked terrified. She kept glancing at the other cars, expecting a hit squad. "Relax." "Tessa," I said, leaning against her passenger door. "They are not the CIA. They are just greedy men in suits." Tessa handed me a USB drive. I downloaded the raw logs. She whispered, "I went back 6 months. Bella, it is exactly like you thought." I plugged the drive into my laptop. Sitting in the front seat of my car, I pulled up the spreadsheet Tessa had compiled. It was a timeline of corruption. For years, the vendor approval process had been a fortress. I had designed it myself. Every new vendor required 3 signatures and a tax ID verification. But on October 16th, the day my signature authority was revoked, the pattern changed. Northline Advisory began billing. But it wasn't just Northline. There were 3 other new vendors: Apex Logistics, Midwest Strategic Partners, Blue River Consulting. The invoices were all just under the $50,000 threshold that required board review. And they all started the moment I was removed from the chain of command. "They blinded you so they could bleed the accounts," Tessa said, her voice trembling. I looked at the totals. In 3 weeks, they had siphoned out nearly $150,000. "This isn't just skimming," I said. "This is cash flow manipulation. They are moving money out to shell companies to lower the cash on hand, probably to justify the need for the loan. Or they are just stealing it while they can." Tessa looked at me, her eyes wide. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "You are going to do nothing." I said, "You are going to go back to work. Keep your head down and act like you notice nothing. I will handle this. Be careful." "Bella," she said, "Grant asked me yesterday if I had seen you. He looked desperate. Desperate men make mistakes." I said, "I needed to know how the operation was actually running. The spreadsheets told me the financial story, but I needed the ground truth." I drove to our secondary distribution hub on the south side of Briar Glen. I parked around the back, near the loading docks. Mateo Grant was the project manager for the Industrial Services Division. He was a big man with calloused hands and a reputation for honesty that had cost him 2 promotions. We were not related, despite the last name, which was a standing joke between us. I found him supervising a loading crew. He looked exhausted. He was wearing a safety vest that looked 2 sizes too small. "Mateo," I called out. He turned, wiping sweat from his forehead. When he saw me, his face broke into a mixture of relief and wariness. "Bella," he said, "I thought you were ghosting us. I heard you were on special projects. I am. I said, special project. Figuring out why this place is falling apart. Matteo snorted. Come with me. We walked away from the crew. Finding a quiet spot behind a stack of pallets. It is a mess. Bella, Matteo said, keeping his voice low. We are missing deadlines. The new scheduling software they forced on us is garbage, and they cut my overtime budget to 0. Who is they? I asked. Grant, Matteo said, and that new operations girl. Sarah. She denies every request I submit. We are 2 weeks behind on the creeping crane project, and do you know what Grant did? He blamed my team in the staff meeting, said we lacked hustle. I felt a flash of anger. Matteo's team was the best in the company. He is squeezing you, I said. He is cutting costs to make the margins look artificially high for the bank. He doesn't care if the work gets done. As long as the payroll number is low this month, Matteo kicked at the concrete. It is going to blow up. Bella, we have a major install for the Peterson account next week. We don't have the manpower. If we miss that date, the penalty clauses kick in. It will cost us 10 times what he saved on overtime. I need you to document that. Matteo, I said, send me the emails where you requested the overtime and were denied. Send me the schedule showing the inevitable delay. Matteo hesitated. If they find out I'm talking to you, they won't. I promised. But Matteo, if this loan goes through, it gets worse. They are going to load us with debt. The first thing they will cut is your pension match. The second thing they will cut is your team. Matteo looked at me. He nodded slowly. I will send it tonight, he said. Get him, Bella. That evening, there was a client dinner at the Chop House, the most expensive steakhouse in the city. Technically, as the director of special projects, I was not invited, but I was still an employee. And the client, Peterson Industrial, had been my account for 5 years. I put on my best black dress. I applied my makeup with the precision of war paint. I walked into the private dining room at 7:30. Grant was holding court at the head of the table. Malcolm was beside him, the CEO of Peterson Industrial. A no-nonsense man named Frank was listening intently. The conversation stopped when I walked in. Grant's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. Bella, he exclaimed, standing up. We didn't expect you. I smiled. I wouldn't miss seeing Frank. I said, I heard we are discussing the expansion. I took the empty seat at the end of the table. The waiter poured me a glass of wine. Grant sat down, his eyes drilling into me. He turned back to Frank. As I was saying, Frank, Grant said, his voice regaining its smooth cadence. The new capital allows us to scale immediately. We can handle your entire Midwest rollout. We have the capacity to double our throughput by next month. I took a sip of wine. Double? Frank asked, raising an eyebrow. That is ambitious. Grant, you usually run at 80% utilization. We have streamlined, Grant said confidently. We have unlocked efficiencies, and we are bringing on new strategic partners to handle the overflow. I set my glass down. Strategic partners? I asked, my voice pleasant and inquisitive. Grant looked at me. His jaw muscle twitched. Yes, Bella. Partners. Like Northline Advisory? I asked. The table went quiet. Malcolm shifted in his seat. Northline is a consultant, Grant said quickly. Oh, I said, I assumed since you were promising double capacity when we just cut the overtime budget for the install team, you must be planning to subcontract the actual work. Is Northline a subcontractor? Or are they just billing us for advice on how to miss deadlines? Frank looked from me to Grant. Is there a capacity issue? Frank asked. Grant laughed. A forced sound. Bella is out of the operational loop. Frank, she worries. We have it covered. We have a new vendor network ready to go. A vendor network in Alder Creek. Indiana? I asked. Grant's face turned red. That is enough. Bella? Malcolm snapped. I looked at Frank. Frank, I said, I would ask for a list of these subcontractors before you sign the renewal. Just for your own compliance team. You know how strict your safety standards are. You wouldn't want an unvetted shell company handling your heavy installs. Frank nodded slowly. He looked at Grant with a new coolness. That is a fair point, Frank said. Send me the vendor list in the morning. Grant. Before we finalize the contract, I stood up. Enjoy your steaks. Gentlemen, I said. I walked out. I had planted the seed. Frank would dig. And when he dug, he would find the hollow shell where our capacity used to be. The next morning, Denise Harrow called me. I have someone you need to meet. She said, she gave me an address in the financial district. It wasn't a glass tower. It was a renovated brownstone, understated and solid. The plaque on the door read, Sable Ridge Holdings. Inside, the office was quiet. It smelled of old books and coffee. I met with a woman named Elena Vance. She was the managing partner. She was 60, with gray hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. Denise tells me you are in a fight. Elena said, I am. I said, and she tells me you actually know how to run a business. Elena added, that is a rare combination. Usually, the people who like to fight are terrible at operations, and the operators are too polite to fight. I explained the situation, the recap, the fraud, the danger to the employees. Elena listened. She took notes in a leather notebook. We don't do hostile takeovers, Elena said. We are long-term capital. We buy good companies that are being mismanaged. We fix them. We hold them. That is what I want. I said, I don't want to strip it. I want to save it. Elena leaned forward. Here is the reality. Bella, if your brother and Malcolm have 51%, they can do what they want. They can drive it off a cliff. Unless I can break their control. I said. Elena nodded. If you can prove the governance is broken, or if you can block their financing, they will be distressed. They will need a lifeline. We can be that lifeline. We can offer to buy out Malcolm and recapitalize the company properly. But we need a CEO who can deliver. I can deliver. I said. Elena looked at me. Can you fire your brother? She asked. The question hung in the air. I thought about the playground. I thought about the Christmases. I thought about the way Grant had looked at me in the break room, telling me I wasn't built for the big table. I wasn't just fighting for the company. I was fighting for my own definition of self. I didn't want to be the vindictive sister. I didn't want to be the destroyer. But Grant had crossed a line. He wasn't just my brother anymore. He was a liability. He was a danger to the livelihood of 200 families. Yes, I said, I can fire him. Elena nodded. Get us a legal opening, she said, and we will back your bid. I went back to Mara's office with a new energy. We had the money. Now we needed the fork. Mara was buried in a stack of documents. I found something, she said as I walked in. She held up a piece of paper. It was a copy of the board consent that authorized Grant's promotion to partner. I pulled this from the corporate records request we filed. Mara said, look at the signatures. I looked. There were 3 signatures. Malcolm Weller, Howard Morgan, my father, and a third director, a silent investor named Dr. Aris. Look closely at your father's signature, Mara said. She placed a transparency over the document. On the transparency was another signature. My father's signature from a tax filing 2 years ago. She lined them up. They matched perfectly. Every loop, every slant, every hesitation mark. It is a digital stamp. I said, exactly. Mara said, people don't sign their names identically twice. There is always variance. This is a copy-paste job. She pulled out another document. And look at the date. She said, this consent is dated August 1st, but the metadata on the file shows it was created on October 10th. 2 days before the announcement, they backdated it. I said, and they forged your father's approval. Mara said, or at least, they used his stamp without a meeting. This was the smoking gun. The partnership agreement required a unanimous vote of all shareholders to admit a new partner. If my father hadn't actually voted, if they had just stamped his name, then Grant wasn't a partner. And if Grant wasn't a partner, he had no authority to sign the bank documents. We have them, I said. Mara nodded. But we have to play this carefully. If we expose this now, the bank walks, the company collapses, and everyone loses. We need to use this to force them to the table. We create a fork. I said, right, Mara said. Option A. We go to court, expose the fraud, and Grant goes to jail for forgery. Option B, they admit the process was flawed, cancel the recap, and agree to a buyout negotiation with Sable Ridge. It was a clean trap. It gave them a way out that didn't involve handcuffs, but it required them to surrender control. Draft the letter. I said. I returned to the office on Thursday morning, feeling a strange sense of calm. The storm was coming, but I was the captain now. I walked toward my storage closet office. My keycard didn't work on the hallway door. I tried it again. Red light. A security guard I didn't recognize stepped out of the elevator. He was wearing a uniform that said Metro Security. Not our usual guys. Bella Morgan? He asked. Yes. I need you to come with me, he said. He escorted me to the lobby. The receptionist, a girl named Chloe who I had hired, looked down at her desk, refusing to meet my eyes. Malcolm was standing by the glass doors. He held a letter in his hand. What is this? I asked. Administrative leave, Malcolm said. His voice was cold, stripped of all the fake grandfatherly warmth. On what grounds? I asked. Pending a review of your conduct, Malcolm said. We have evidence that you have been sharing proprietary data with external parties, and that you attempted to sabotage a client relationship at dinner last night. He handed me the letter. You are banned from the premises. Bella, your access to all systems has been terminated. Do not contact any employees. Do not speak to clients. If you violate these terms, we will file a restraining order and sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. I took the letter. I looked at Malcolm. He looked smug. He thought he had won. He thought that by cutting off my access, he had cut off my power. He didn't know I had the logs. He didn't know I had the forgery. He didn't know I had Sable Ridge. And he didn't know that by firing me, he had just freed me. I am not an employee anymore? I asked. No, Malcolm said. You are a liability. Go home. Bella, let the adults handle the business. I smiled. It was a genuine smile. It terrified him. I smiled because I knew something he didn't. I knew that the adults were about to face a reckoning they couldn't bluster their way out of. Okay, Malcolm, I said. I will go home. I walked out the door. The sun was shining. The air was crisp. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and pulled out my phone. I called Mara. They locked me out. I said, Good, Mara said. That triggers the oppression of minority shareholder clause in your vesting agreement. They just gave us standing to sue for immediate relief. Launch it, I said. I started the car. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going home to war. Being placed on administrative leave was intended to be a sentence of silence. Malcolm and Grant believed that by stripping my badge and locking my email, they had severed my connection to reality. They thought I would retreat to my apartment, cry into a pint of ice cream, and wait for their settlement offer to arrive via courier. They did not understand that they had just given me the one thing I had been missing for 10 years, time, for the first 48 hours. I did not sleep. I turned my dining room table into a command center. I went to an office supply store and bought 3-ring binders, tab dividers, and a label maker. There is a specific power in a well-organized binder. A chaotic pile of papers looks like a conspiracy theory. A chronological, indexed, and cross-referenced binder looks like a lawsuit. I built the narrative not with adjectives, but with dates. Tab 1. The financial inconsistencies. I printed the spreadsheets Tessa had given me. I highlighted the Northline advisory payments in yellow. I matched them against the days I was removed from the approval chain. The correlation was visually undeniable. Tab 2. The governance flaws. I included the copies of the board consent forms Mara had pulled, flagging the identical signatures. I added the bylaws of the company, circling the clause that required a unanimous vote for new partner admission. Tab 3. The self-dealing. I included the printouts from the Indiana Secretary of State showing Grant's shell company. I mapped the address to the strip mall. When I was finished, the binder was 3 inches thick. It was heavy. It felt like a weapon. I wasn't building a story about a sister who was jealous of her brother. I was building a case about a fiduciary breach that endangered the solvency of a mid-sized industrial firm. It was boring. It was dry. It was lethal. On Wednesday morning, I met with Elena Vance at Sable Ridge Holdings again. I placed the binder on her desk. Elena opened it. She flipped through the pages in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound in the room was the rustle of paper and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, she looked up. "This is thorough," she said. "It is the truth." I said. Elena closed the binder. "Here is where we stand. Bella, my investment committee likes the asset. Redwood Meridian has good bones. Despite the rot at the top, we are willing to back your acquisition. We will put up the capital to buy out the majority stake and refinance the debt." I felt a surge of relief, but Elena held up a hand. "However," she continued, "we are not venture capitalists. We are not gamblers. We will only wire the funds if you can prove you have a legal path to control. We are not going to buy into a lawsuit. You need to show me that you can stop this recapitalization deal before it closes. If the bank signs that amendment and Grant gets his money, the company is poisoned." We walk away. I nodded. "So I have to block the closing." "You have to kill the closing," Elena corrected. "You have to make the bank run for the hills, and you have to do it by Friday." "Friday? 2 days. I can do it," I said. Elena looked at me, her eyes assessing. "Don't do it because you are angry, Bella. Do it because you are the better operator. If you do this for revenge, you will screw up the integration. If you do it for the business, you will win. I am doing it for the business." I lied, or maybe it was half true. The anger was the fuel, but the business was the engine. I left Sable Ridge and called Mara. "We have a problem." Mara said immediately. "Jonah Pierce just back-channeled me." "What did he say?" "The bank is moving the closing up," Mara said. "They are pushing to sign the amendment tomorrow afternoon. Thursday. Malcolm is offering a concession on the interest rate to get it done fast. Tomorrow." I repeated. My stomach tightened. "Why the rush?" "Because they know you are circling." Mara said. "They know you have a lawyer. They want the ink dry before we can file an injunction. We need to file now." I said, "We can't." Mara said, "We don't have enough yet. The identical signatures are good, but a judge might just call it a clerical error and let them cure it later. We need something structural. We need proof that the entire authorization is void." I thought about the board consent, the document that said the partners had voted to make Grant a partner and approve the recap. It had my father's signature on it. "I need to talk to Howard." I said, "Bella," Mara warned, "if you confront him and he tips off Malcolm, he is the weak link." "Mara," I said, "I know my father. He avoids conflict. If he signed that document knowing it was a lie, he will crumble. If he didn't know, then we have fraud." My parents' house was a colonial on the north side of Briar Glen, the kind of house that projected stability and traditional values. The lawn was manicured. The shutters were freshly painted. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment. This was the house where I had learned to ride a bike. This was the house where Grant and I had played hide-and-seek. I walked to the front door and let myself in. Mom? Dad? I found them in the sunroom. My mother was reading a magazine. My father was watching the business news on mute. When I walked in, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Bella," my mother said, closing her magazine, "we didn't expect you. Grant said you were taking some time away." I ignored her and looked at my father. He looked older than he had at the party. His skin was papery, gray. "Dad," I said, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to tell me the truth, not the version you tell Mom to keep her happy, the actual truth." Howard shifted in his chair. "He wouldn't meet my eyes. Now, Bella." Elaine interjected, standing up. "We are not going to have a scene. Your brother is under a lot of pressure. He is trying to save the company. He is trying to sell the company." "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, "he is loading it with debt to pay himself a bonus." "That is not true," Elaine snapped. "It is expansion capital. Grant explained it to us." I kept my eyes on my father. "Dad, did you vote for this?" I asked. "Did you actually sit in a board meeting and vote to make Grant a partner?" Howard looked at his hands. We discuss things. Bella, it is a family business. We don't always have formal meetings. I pulled the copy of the board consent from my bag. I placed it on the glass table in front of him. This document says there was a meeting on August 1st. I said, it says you voted to approve the recapitalization and grants partnership. Is that your signature? Howard looked at the paper. He squinted. It looks like my signature, he mumbled. Did you sign it on August 1st? I pressed. Howard rubbed his forehead. I don't remember dates. Bella, I sign a lot of things. Malcolm brings over papers. Administrative things. Think, Dad, I said, my voice softening. August 1st. Where were you in August? He frowned. He looked at Elaine. Elaine went still. We were at the hospital, she whispered. That was the week I had my heart scare. We were at St. Jude's for 3 days. I looked at my father. Malcolm came to the hospital. Didn't he? I asked. Howard nodded slowly. Yes. He came to the waiting room. It was late. I was beside myself. Bella, your mother was in surgery. I hadn't slept in 20 hours. And he brought you papers? He said they were routine. Howard said, his voice trembling. He said they were insurance renewals. Payroll authorizations. He said I needed to sign them so the staff would get paid while I was out of the office. Did you read them? I asked. Howard looked up at me. His eyes were wet. I trusted him. Bella, he is my partner. He has been my partner for 40 years. I just signed the stack. I wanted him to leave so I could go back to your mother. The reveal hit me with a dull ache. It wasn't malice. It wasn't a grand conspiracy to cut me out. It was just an old man, tired and scared, being exploited by a friend he thought he knew. Malcolm had walked into a hospital waiting room and weaponized my father's exhaustion to steal the company. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness. He slipped the consent form into the stack. Didn't he? I said quietly. I suppose he must have. Howard whispered, I didn't know. Bella, I swear. I thought Grant was ready. I didn't know they were doing whatever this is. I reached out and took the paper back. Who notarized it? I asked. Howard shook his head. There was no notary there. It was just me and Malcolm in the waiting room. I looked at the document again. There was a notary stamp on it. State of Ohio. My commission expires. I looked at the date on the stamp. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the stamp. Thank you. Dad, I said. I turned to leave. Bella? My mother called out. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual armor. What are you going to do? I am going to fix it. I said. I called Mara from the car. Check the notary. I said. Her name is Sarah Jenkins. Who is Sarah Jenkins? Mara asked. She's the receptionist at Malcolm's law firm. I said. I remember her. She used to answer the phones when I was an intern. I heard the clicking of a keyboard on the other end. Okay. I am looking her up in the Ohio Secretary of State database, Mara said. Sarah Jenkins. Commission number? Here we go. There was a pause. Then Mara laughed. A sharp, barking sound. You are kidding me, Mara said. What? Her commission expired in July. Mara said. She didn't renew it until September. There was a gap. I looked at the date on the document. August 1st. So on August 1st, she wasn't a notary. I said, exactly, Mara said, and even if she was. She wasn't at the hospital. She notarized a signature she didn't witness. Using a stamp that was legally void at the time, the document is trash. I said, it is worse than trash. Mara said, it is evidence of fraud. Defective notarization on a key governance document? The bank will have a heart attack. If we show this to Jonah Pierce, the loan is dead. Don't show it to Jonah yet. I said, why not? Because if we kill the loan now, Malcolm and Grant will just scramble to fix it. They will hold a real meeting, force a real vote, and sign a new document. They still have the votes if Dad caves. Then what do? We use it to force a meeting. I said, a meeting where I have the leverage. I sent an email to Malcolm and Grant. Subject, urgent meeting request regarding board governance. Malcolm. Grant. I have discovered a material defect in the authorization documents for the recapitalization. We need to meet immediately to discuss a resolution before I'm forced to disclose this to external parties. The response came 10 minutes later. Bella, as you are on administrative leave, you have no standing to request meetings. Any concerns should be directed to our legal counsel. We are prepared to offer a mediated exit discussion next week. Next week? They were stalling. They wanted to close the loan tomorrow, get the money, and then deal with me. They were rushing because they knew the paperwork was weak. They were sprinting across a frozen lake, hoping to get to the other side before the ice cracked. I wasn't going to wait. I drove to the office. I knew I couldn't get past the security guards at the front, but I wasn't going to the executive suite. I parked in the visitor lot and waited. At 5:30, Lillian Park walked out. Lillian was the board secretary. She was a woman of absolute precision, a librarian of corporate secrets who took pride in the fact that her minutes were never corrected. She was also someone who valued order above all else. I stepped out of my car. Lillian, I said. She stopped. She looked at me, then glanced around the parking lot. Bella, she said, clutching her purse, I can't talk to you. They sent a memo. I know. I said, I am not asking you to talk about the business. I am asking you to protect yourself. Lillian frowned. What do you mean? I walked closer, keeping a respectful distance. Malcolm is circulating a board consent dated August 1st. I said, it approves Grant's partnership. Did you record that vote? Lillian's face went pale. August 1st? She whispered. Did you send out a notice for a meeting? Did you take minutes? Did you witness the signatures? Lillian looked down at the pavement. No, she said softly. Malcolm told me. He told me it was a unanimous written consent. He just gave me the document to file. He said they handled it informally. Lillian, I said, that document was notarized by a woman with an expired commission, witnessing a signature that happened in a hospital waiting room. It is a forgery, and if the bank finds out you filed it as an official record, you could be named in the fraud investigation. Lillian's eyes widened. She looked terrified. I didn't know. She said, I just filed what they gave me. I believe you. I said, but I need you to prove it. What do you need? I need a certified statement that no board meeting occurred on August 1st, and I need the minutes from the last legitimate meeting we had. Lillian hesitated. That is internal data. It is a subpoena waiting to happen. Lillian, if you give it to me now, you are a whistleblower. If you wait until the lawsuit hits, you are an accomplice. She looked at her car keys. She made a decision. I will email them to your personal account tonight. She said, but don't tell them I gave it to you. Not until you have to. I promise. I said, that night, I sat with the minutes. The last official board meeting had been in January. At that meeting, the board consisted of Malcolm, 30%, Howard, 30%, and 3 minority partners who held the remaining 40%. One of those minority partners was Dr. Aris, another was a trust fund, and the third was Denise Harrow. I stared at the name, Denise. She had retired from operations, but she hadn't sold her shares. She had kept them. I pulled out the capitalization table I had reconstructed from old files. Malcolm, 30%, Howard, 30% Dr. Aris, 10% trust fund, 10% Denise Harrow, 15% Bella, restricted/disputed, 5% Grant had 0. 0. He was acting as a partner, but he owned nothing. He was borrowing authority from Malcolm and Howard. If I could buy Denise's shares, I would have 20%, assuming my 5% held up. 20% wasn't control, but it was a blocking position. In our bylaws, major transactions, like a recapitalization or a sale of assets exceeding $1 million, required a supermajority, 75%. If I had 20%, and I could convince the trust fund or Dr. Aris to abstain, or if I could prove Howard's 30% vote was invalid, I could block the deal, but better than blocking, I could offer an alternative. I called Elena at Sable Ridge. I have a target. I said, Denise Harrow. She owns 15%. Can you get her to sell? Elena asked. I think so. I said, she hates Malcolm. She hates what he has done to the culture. Buy her out. Elena said, we will wire the funds to an escrow account tomorrow morning if you can get her signature on a purchase agreement. You walk into that office not as a fired employee, but as a major shareholder. And then you demand a board meeting. I met Denise at her house the next morning. It was Thursday, the day of the closing. Denise was gardening. She wore a straw hat and muddy gloves. Bella, she said, standing up, you look like you haven't slept. I haven't. I said, Denise, I need your help. I need your shares. Denise took off her gloves. She motioned for me to sit on the patio. I heard they fired you. She said, they tried. I said, Denise, they are closing a loan today that will saddle the company with $10 million in debt. They are going to use it to buy out the passive investors. Are they buying you out? Denise laughed dryly. Malcolm offered me book value. I told him to go to hell. I can offer you fair market value. I said, Sable Ridge is backing me. We want to buy your 15%. Today, now. Denise looked at me. She studied my face. Why? She asked. So you can be the boss? So I can stop them? I said, so I can fire Grant. So I can keep the warehouse open. Denise sighed. She looked out at her garden. I built that operations team. Bella, I hired half those people. I know. I said, and Grant is going to fire them to pay the interest on his debt. Denise turned back to me. Her eyes were hard. I will sell to you. Bella, on one condition, name it. You put it in writing that there will be no layoffs for 12 months following the acquisition. You protect the people. I can't promise zero turnover. I said honestly, but I can promise no restructuring layoffs. I can promise that we won't gut the staff to pay a private equity firm. Write it down. Denise said. I pulled a purchase agreement from my bag. Mara had drafted it at 3 a.m. I handwrote the clause in the margin. Buyer agrees to maintain current workforce levels for a period of 12 months, barring termination for cause. I signed it. Denise looked at it. She went inside and got a pen. She signed. I took a picture of the document and sent it to Mara. Transfer executed. I own 15%. Mara's reply was immediate. Wiring funds to Denise, filing the transfer notice with the corporate secretary now. You are officially a player. It was 1 p.m. The closing was scheduled for 3 p.m. I had the shares. I had the forged consent. I had the minutes. I drove to the office. This time, when the security guard stepped in front of me, I didn't stop. Ms. Morgan, he said, stepping in front of the door, you are not allowed on the premises. I pulled the purchase agreement from my bag. I am not an employee. I said, I am a shareholder owning 15% of this company. Under the corporate bylaws, I have a right to inspect the books and enter the facility. The guard looked confused. He touched his earpiece. Call Mr. Weller. I said, tell him his partner is here. He hesitated. Do it, I said, my voice cutting like a whip. He spoke into his radio. A moment later, his face went pale. He stepped aside. I walked into the lobby. Chloe, the receptionist, looked up. Her mouth dropped open. I walked past her. Straight to the elevator. I pressed the button for the executive floor. I wasn't going to my storage closet. I was going to the boardroom. When the doors opened, I saw them. Grant, Malcolm, and Jonah Pierce were in the glass-walled conference room. There were stacks of documents on the table. Jonah had a pen in his hand. Grant saw me first. He stood up, his face flushing red. What the hell is she doing here? He shouted. Malcolm stood up. Security? I opened the door and walked in. I slammed the binder onto the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Actually, Grant, I said, my voice steady, my heart hammering a war rhythm against my ribs, you are sitting in my chair. Jonah Pierce looked at me. He looked at the binder. He looked at the pen in his hand. He capped the pen. Ms. Morgan, Jonah said, his voice cool and professional. You have an objection? I have a purchase agreement, I said, sliding the document across the table. I just acquired Denise Harrow's stake. I control 15% of this company, and I am formally challenging the authority of these two men to sign any debt instruments on behalf of Redwood Meridian." Grant looked at the paper. He looked at me. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "We have the majority." "No, you don't," I said. "You have a forged consent form signed in a hospital waiting room and notarized by a woman whose license was expired." I looked at Jonah. "Ask to see the August 1st board minutes." "Jonah, ask them where the meeting was held." Jonah looked at Malcolm. Malcolm had gone very, very still. "Is this true?" Jonah asked. "It is a family misunderstanding," Malcolm said, sweat beading on his forehead. I opened the binder to tab 2. The notary stamp, the dates. "This isn't a misunderstanding." I said, "It is fraud." Jonah picked up his briefcase. He put the loan documents back inside. "I think we are done here for today," Jonah said. He looked at Malcolm. "Don't call me until you have a clean capitalization table and a lawyer." He walked out. The room was silent. The loan was dead. The money was gone. Grant looked at me with pure hatred. "You just killed the company," he whispered. "No, Grant," I said. Sitting down at the head of the table, "I just saved it." The wire transfer confirmation from Sable Ridge Holdings hit my inbox at 8 in the morning on Friday. It was a sterile, automated notification. But to me, it looked like a declaration of independence. The funds had cleared. Denise Harrow's 15% stake in Redwood Meridian Group was legally mine. I sat in Mara's conference room, staring at the screen. I was no longer Bella Morgan, the fired director of operations. I was Bella Morgan, a major shareholder with statutory rights to inspect the books, call meetings, and sue for fiduciary breach. Mara Klein walked in, dropping a heavy stack of filed pleadings onto the table. "We are on the docket," she said, her voice raspy from a sleepless night. "Judge Holloway, Bryer County Civil Court, 11 o'clock, emergency hearing for a temporary restraining order. Did you get the service of process to them?" I asked. "The courier just dropped it at Malcolm's desk," Mara said with a grim smile. "They are scrambling. They thought Jonah walking out yesterday bought them a weekend to fix the paperwork. They didn't expect us to drag them before a judge this morning." I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my navy suit. I felt a strange vibration in my chest. Not fear, but the high-frequency hum of adrenaline. "What is the strategy?" I asked. "Boring," Mara said. "We do not talk about your brother's ego. We do not talk about your mother's heart condition. We talk about the notary stamp. We talk about the bylaws. We talk about the unapproved vendor payments. We make it a dry, technical argument about governance failure." "And Grant?" I asked. "He will try to make it personal." Mara said, "He will try to paint you as the hysterical sister who is burning down the house because she didn't get a room with a view." "You have to be ice. If you react, we lose." I nodded. "I can be ice." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, smelling of floor wax and old wood. Judge Holloway was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and an expression that suggested she had absolutely no patience for corporate drama on a Friday. Malcolm and Grant sat at the defense table with their lawyer, a slick man named Sterling who charged $600 an hour to make problems disappear. Grant looked furious. His face was flushed, and he kept whispering aggressively into Sterling's ear. Malcolm looked diminished, slumping slightly in his chair. Judge Holloway tapped her gavel once. "We are here on the matter of Morgan versus Redwood Meridian Group et al." She said, "Plaintiff seeks a temporary restraining order to block a recapitalization transaction." "Ms. Klein, you have 5 minutes." Mara stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't pace. She simply opened her binder. "Your Honor," Mara said, "this is a simple case of unauthorized corporate action. The defendants are attempting to close a $10 million debt facility that encumbers the company's assets. Our bylaws require a supermajority vote for such a transaction. The defendants claim they have this authority based on a board consent dated August 1st. She held up the exhibit. "This consent," Mara continued, "bears the notary stamp of one Sarah Jenkins. As the Secretary of State's records show in Exhibit B, Ms. Jenkins' commission expired in July and was not renewed until September. On August 1st, she was not a notary. Furthermore, the signature she purported to witness was that of Howard Morgan, who has provided a sworn affidavit stating he was never in a board meeting on that date, but rather in a hospital waiting room. The judge looked at the papers. She flipped a page. "Mr. Sterling?" the judge asked, looking over her glasses. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, these are clerical errors," he said smoothly. "Technicalities. The intent of the board was clear." Mr. Howard Morgan signed the document. He does not deny his signature. The plaintiff, Bella Morgan, is a former employee who was terminated for cause earlier this week. She is using this filing to harass the company and settle a personal score with her brother. Grant nodded vigorously, glaring at me. "She is unstable," Grant blurted out. Sterling put a hand on Grant's arm to silence him. "Ms. Morgan has a history of conflict with the current leadership," Sterling continued. "This injunction would cause irreparable harm to the business, killing a vital expansion deal. We ask the court to dismiss." The judge looked at me. "Ms. Morgan," she said. I stood up. My knees felt steady. "Your Honor," I said, "I am not asking for the company to be handed to me. I am not asking for damages. I am asking for the law to be followed." I pointed to the binder. "I have submitted evidence of $150,000 in payments to a vendor called Northline Advisory, authorized by Grant Morgan immediately after I was removed from the oversight chain. These payments were hidden in a suspense account. If the recapitalization proceeds today, control of the company passes irrevocably to the very people who authorized those payments." I paused, locking eyes with the judge. "I am a 15% shareholder. I am asking for a pause. I am asking that no money changes hands and no shares are transferred until a legitimate board meeting can be held to verify the votes. That is not harassment. That is governance." The judge studied me. She looked for the crack in the facade, the angry sister, the scorned employee. She found only a woman who knew her numbers. She turned to Sterling. "Counsel, can you explain the notary discrepancy?" she asked. Sterling hesitated. "We are investigating that. Your Honor, it appears to be an administrative oversight. An administrative oversight on a $10 million loan is not a clerical error." "Mr. Sterling," the judge said sharply, "it is a defect." She picked up her pen. "I am granting the temporary restraining order," she said. Grant slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. Sit down. Mr. Morgan," the judge barked. She turned back to the room. "The defendants are enjoined from closing the credit facility, amending the covenants, or transferring any equity until a full meeting of the board of directors is conducted. This meeting must occur within 48 hours. The minutes will be submitted to this court." She banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned." Grant turned to look at me. If eyes could burn, I would have been ash. "You think this is a win?" he hissed as I walked past their table. "You just froze the accounts. We can't make payroll next week." "Then maybe you shouldn't have stolen the operating cash," I said quietly. The board meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning in the main conference room at Redwood Meridian. It was a forced march. The court order demanded attendance. The atmosphere in the room was toxic. Malcolm sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 days. Grant sat to his right, tapping a pen against the glass table with a frantic, staccato rhythm. On the other side sat the independent directors. Dr. Aris, a retired surgeon who had invested 20 years ago and usually only showed up for the holiday party, and a representative from the trust fund, a young lawyer named Peter, and me. I sat at the far end, with Mara next to me. Jonah Pierce sat in the corner. He wasn't a board member, but as the representative of the bank holding our current lines of credit. He had invoked his right to observe any emergency governance proceedings. His presence was a reminder that the sword of Damocles was hanging over everyone's head. Malcolm cleared his throat. "I call this meeting to order," he said. "We are here to clarify the record regarding the recapitalization vote." He looked at Lillian Park, the board secretary. Lillian looked terrified, but she had her laptop open and her hands poised over the keyboard. "Lillian," Malcolm said, "please read the minutes from the August 1st meeting." Lillian looked at me. I gave her a small nod. "Just the truth." She took a deep breath. "Mr. Weller," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have no minutes for a meeting on August 1st. The room went silent. Malcolm's face tightened. "You have the written consent." Lillian. "The one I gave you. I have a document you handed to me on October 10th, Lillian said, reading from a prepared statement. "But I have no record of a meeting being called, no record of a notice being sent to shareholders, and no record of a vote being tallied." "Doctor?" Aris leaned forward. He adjusted his glasses. "Wait a minute. Doctor," Aris said, "you are saying we never voted?" Malcolm turned to him. "It was a consent resolution." "Aris, we discussed it. You signed it. I signed a paper you sent me by courier." "Doctor," Aris said, frowning, "you told me it was a routine renewal of the line of credit. You didn't tell me it was a buyout that gave Grant 51%. I did." Malcolm lied. "You must have misread it." "Doctor." Aris looked at the document in front of him. He looked at Grant. "I didn't vote for this boy to run the company," Aris said bluntly. "No offense." "Grant, but you are not ready." "I am the partner," Grant shouted, standing up. "I brought in the deal. I brought in the capital." "Sit down." "Grant," I said. He glared at me, but he sat. I turned to Jonah Pierce. "Mr. Pierce," I said, as the bank's observer, "do you have questions regarding the use of funds?" Jonah stood up. He walked to the table. "The bank is concerned about related party transactions." Jonah said, specifically, payments made to entities controlled by officers of the company. He looked at Grant. "Mr. Morgan," Jonah said, "do you have any financial interest in a vendor known as Northline Advisory?" Grant didn't blink. "No." Jonah paused. "Are you certain?" "I have never heard of them." Grant said, "They are just a consultant. Bella hired them. Probably. She is trying to frame me." I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was the printout from the Indiana Secretary of State. "This is the formation document for GM Ventures, LLC." I said, "The registered agent address matches the remittance address on the Northline invoices. The manager of GM Ventures is listed as Grant Morgan." I looked at Dr. Aris. "Grant has been approving payments to himself." I said, "He bypassed the procurement department and drained $150,000 from the operating account in 3 weeks." "Doctor." Aris picked up the paper. He looked at it. He looked at Grant. "Is this true?" "Doctor," Aris asked. Grant's face was a mask of panic. "It was a management fee." He stammered. "For the deal. I was doing the work. I deserve to be compensated." "You lied to the bank," Jonah said coldly. "You just stated on the record that you had no interest. That is fraud." "Mr. Morgan," Jonah closed his notebook. "Lakefront Commonwealth Bank is declaring a default on the existing credit lines due to material breach of covenant regarding management integrity. You have 30 days to cure, or we call the loan." He walked out. The room imploded. "30 days!" Malcolm shouted, putting his head in his hands. "We don't have the cash to pay off the line. We are bankrupt." "Not necessarily," I said. The room quieted. Everyone looked at me. "I have a solution," I said. I opened a folder. "Sable Ridge Holdings is prepared to offer a stabilization package." I said, "We will refinance the existing debt. We will inject $2 million in operating capital to clear the payables and secure the inventory for the Peterson account." Malcolm looked up, hope warring with suspicion in his eyes. "What is the catch?" he asked. "It is a buyout," I said. "Sable Ridge acquires your 30% stake. Malcolm, at fair market value, you retire. You get to walk away with your reputation intact and enough money to fix your personal situation." I looked at Grant, and Grant is terminated for cause, effective immediately. Grant laughed. It was a high, hysterical sound. "You think you can fire me? I am the CEO. I am the partner. You are a thief." "Grant," I said calmly, "and you are the reason the bank just walked out." I looked at the board members. I move that we terminate Grant Morgan for cause, citing self-dealing and fraud, and I move that we accept the Sable Ridge letter of intent to recapitalize the company. Doctor? Aris looked at the trust fund lawyer. The lawyer nodded. I second the motion. Doctor, Aris said. It is a vote, I said. All in favor? I raised my hand. Doctor, Aris raised his hand. The trust fund lawyer raised his hand. Howard Morgan, my father, sat frozen. He looked at Grant. He looked at me. Dad? I said softly. Howard closed his eyes. He raised his hand. It is carried, I said. Grant stood up. He knocked his chair over. You are stealing it, he screamed. You are stealing my company. Security, I said to the guard standing by the door. Please escort Mr. Morgan from the building. Grant looked at Malcolm. Malcolm? Do something. Malcolm didn't look up. He was staring at the table, defeated. Grant was led out, shouting obscenities that echoed down the hallway until the heavy doors clicked shut. The meeting adjourned, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Doctor? Aris shook my hand and left, muttering about needing a stiff drink. The trust fund lawyer hurried off to file a report. I was alone with Malcolm. He sat at the end of the table, his hands clasped in front of him. He looked like a statue of a man who had once been important. Why? I asked. Malcolm sighed, a long, rattling exhale. I needed the money. Bella, I know about your debts, I said, but why Grant? Why destroy the company? I didn't think it would be destroyed. Malcolm said, I thought Grant could sell it. He has that way about him. People like him. People believe him. You used him. I said, you knew he wasn't ready. You knew he didn't understand the covenants. You wound him up and set him loose so you could cash out. He was willing. Malcolm said, he wanted the title so badly he didn't ask questions. I just gave him what he wanted. You gave him a loaded gun. I said. Malcolm looked at me. So, you win? He said. You get the company. I get my buyout. Yes, I said. The paperwork is being drawn up. You will sign it on Monday. Malcolm stood up. He walked to the window. There is something you should know. Bella, what? The recap deal. The one with Rook and Feld? Malcolm said. His back to me. It wasn't just a loan. I waited. A cold feeling started to creep up my spine. Rook and Feld required collateral. Malcolm said, hard collateral. The inventory? I asked. The receivables? Those were already pledged to the bank. Malcolm said, Rook and Feld wanted more. They wanted unencumbered assets. He turned around. Grant signed a pledge agreement. Malcolm said, he pledged the real estate, the warehouse, the land. I stared at him. The warehouse was our only owned asset. It was worth $3 million. It was the safety net. He didn't have authorization to pledge the land. I said, that requires a board vote. He signed a personal guarantee. Malcolm said, and he signed an affidavit stating he had full authority. So? I said, it is void. He lied. Malcolm shook his head. It is not that simple. Bella, Grant used the land as collateral for a bridge loan to cover the closing costs. Rook and Feld advanced him $500,000 last week to GM Ventures. My blood ran cold. He took cash? I whispered. He took the cash. Malcolm said, and he spent it. He paid the lawyers. He paid the fees. I think he bought a car. If the deal doesn't close. If the deal doesn't close, Malcolm said, Rook and Feld will call the bridge loan. They will demand the $500,000 back immediately. Since Grant spent it, they will exercise their lien on the warehouse. They will foreclose. I said, yes, Malcolm said. They will take the building, and without the building, you have no operations. I sank into the chair. Grant hadn't just stolen from the cash flow. He had pawned the building we worked in. He had spent $500,000 of a vulture fund's money, and now that I had killed the deal, the vulture was coming for its pound of flesh. You let him do this? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. I couldn't stop him. Malcolm said weakly. He was out of control. He thought he was rich. I looked at the phone. I had to call Elena. If Rook and Feld foreclosed on the warehouse, Sable Ridge wouldn't touch us. We would be a company with no home, no credit, and a legal war over the real estate. The employees would be on the street in a month. I have to fix this, I said. Good luck, Bella, Malcolm said. He picked up his briefcase and walked out. I sat alone in the boardroom. The victory of the vote felt like ash in my mouth. I had fired my brother, but he had left a bomb under the floorboards, and the timer was ticking down to 0. I drove to the warehouse. It was Saturday, but the shift was running to catch up on the Peterson order. I parked and walked onto the floor. The sound of forklifts and conveyor belts was a mechanical symphony. I saw Mateo Grant directing a loader. He saw me and jogged over. I heard the news, Mateo said, grinning. The grapevine is fast. Grant is out? He is out. I said, so we are safe? Mateo asked. I looked around the warehouse. I looked at the racking that held millions of dollars of inventory. I looked at the 50 people working on the line. I looked at the roof over their heads. The roof that Grant had gambled away. I forced a smile. We are working on it. Mateo, keep the line moving. I walked to the manager's office, a glass box overlooking the floor. I sat down and pulled out my phone. I dialed Mara. Don't celebrate yet. I said, what is it? Mara asked. Grant signed a bridge loan with Rook and Feld. I said, he pledged the warehouse. He took $500,000 in cash and spent it. They are going to foreclose. There was a long silence on the other end. That is criminal fraud, Mara said. I know. I said, but that doesn't help me save the building. If they foreclose, we are dead. We need to pay them off. Mara said, we don't have $500,000. I said, the accounts are frozen. Then we need to negotiate. Mara said, we need to threaten them. They lent money to a shell company based on a fraudulent affidavit. If they try to foreclose, we will drag them into court for predatory lending and aiding and abetting a breach of fiduciary duty. Will that work? I asked. It might buy us time. Mara said, but Bella, Rook and Feld are sharks. They don't scare easily. They might just seize the asset and dare us to sue them. I looked through the glass at the workers. I need a meeting with them. I said, with who? Rook and Feld. I said, I am going to walk into the lion's den. Bella. Mara warned. Set it up. Mara. Monday morning. I hung up. I looked at the binder still sitting on the desk. The evidence of my brother's betrayal was complete, but the damage went deeper than spreadsheets. He had sold our foundation. I wasn't just fighting for control anymore. I was fighting for survival. I walked out of the office and onto the floor. I walked down the main aisle, nodding to the workers who had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was mortgaged to a predator. I would not let them lose their jobs. I would sell my own house before I let that happen. I stopped at the loading dock and looked out at the parking lot. Grant's reserved space was empty. The sign that said Grant Morgan, partner, was still there. I reached out and ripped the sign off the wall. It clattered onto the concrete. You are fired, Grant, I whispered to the empty air, and I am going to clean up your mess. Sunday was a blur of preparation. I spent the day with Elena Vance at Sable Ridge. Explaining the new crisis, Elena was not happy. This changes the valuation. Bella, she said, pacing her office, a $500,000 liability? A potential foreclosure? This is messy. It is fixable, I argued. The underlying business is strong. The Peterson contract is solid. We just need to clear this bridge loan. We can add the $500,000 to the stabilization package. Elena said slowly, but it comes with a cost. We will need more equity. How much? I asked. We want 51%. Elena said, we want control. I hesitated. My goal had been to run the company, to be the owner. If I gave them 51%, I was just an employee again, but if I didn't, the warehouse was gone. I will give you 49%, I said, and a board seat, and a veto on any debt over $1 million. Elena looked at me. She smiled slightly. You negotiate hard. Bella, I have to. I said, 49%. Elena agreed, but you handle Rook and Feld. If you can't get them to release the lien for the principal amount, no interest, no penalties. We walk. I nodded. Deal. Monday morning. The offices of Rook and Feld Capital were in a skyscraper in downtown Chicago. They were intimidating, black marble, chrome, and silence. I walked into the conference room with Mara. Sitting across from us was a man named Victor Rook. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He looked like a man who ate distress for lunch. Ms. Morgan, Victor said, I understand there has been a change in management. There has. I said, and I understand you are refusing to honor the bridge loan your CEO signed. Victor said, I am refusing to honor a fraudulent instrument signed by an unauthorized officer who diverted the funds to a personal shell company. I said, Victor smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. That sounds like an internal problem. Ms. Morgan, we hold a valid lien on 1,200 Industrial Parkway. We expect repayment of $500,000, plus $50,000 in fees, by tomorrow, or we initiate foreclosure. I leaned forward. Mr. Rook, I said, you are a sophisticated lender. You did due diligence. You knew, or you should have known, that the collateral pledge required a board resolution. The resolution you have is a forgery. I slid the notary affidavit across the table. If you try to foreclose, I continued, I will file a suit for aiding and abetting corporate fraud. I will depose your loan officers. I will subpoena your emails with Grant Morgan. And I will make sure that every institutional investor who backs your fund knows that you lend money to shell companies based on forged documents. Victor stopped smiling. He looked at the affidavit. He picked it up. He studied it. He looked at me. What do you want? He asked. I want a release of the lien. I said, in exchange for the principal, $500,000, no fees, no interest, and you walk away. Victor laughed. We don't work for free. Ms. Morgan, you aren't working. I said, you are laundering a mistake. If you fight me, you might get the warehouse in 2 years after a public legal battle that destroys your reputation. If you take the deal, you get your capital back today. I pulled a check from my folder. It was a cashier's check from Sable Ridge. $500,000. Take the check. Victor, sign the release. And we forget you ever met Grant Morgan. Victor looked at the check. He looked at me. He saw that I wasn't bluffing. He saw that I was ready to burn his reputation to the ground to save my company. He reached out and took the check. He pressed a button on the intercom. Bring me the release for the Redwood file, he said. I walked out of the building an hour later. I had the release in my hand. The warehouse was safe. I called Mateo. We are clear. I said, the building is ours. I heard him cheer in the background. I hung up and stood on the sidewalk in the wind. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I had fired my brother. I had forced out my father's partner. I had fought a bank, a court, and a vulture fund. I had won. But as I hailed a cab, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy. I thought of Grant, alone in his condo, with a $500,000 debt he couldn't pay and a fraud investigation looming. The business was safe. The family was destroyed. I got into the cab. Where to? The driver asked. Redwood Meridian. I said. It was time to go to work. The Monday morning sky over Briar Glen was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with rain that refused to fall. I stood in the lobby of Lakefront Commonwealth Bank. Shaking the water from my umbrella, I was not there to beg. I was there to trade. Jonah Pierce met me at the security gate. He did not smile, but he did not turn me away. Conference room 1, he said. We sat at a table that was far too large for 2 people. I placed a single document in front of him. It was a term sheet, but not the one Grant had tried to push through. This was a refinancing proposal, backed by Sable Ridge Holdings, with a personal guarantee from me, not against my assets, but against my performance. We are in technical default. Jonah, I said, starting without a preamble. I know that. The covenants were breached the moment Grant lied about his interest in Northline Advisory. You have every right to call the loan and liquidate us. Jonah folded his hands. Why shouldn't I? He asked. The governance is a disaster. The CEO is being investigated for fraud. The inventory was pledged to a secondary lender without authorization. From a risk perspective, Redwood Meridian is radioactive because the radiation is leaving the building. I said. I slid the second document across the table. It was the signed purchase agreement for Malcolm Weller's 30% stake, along with the transfer of Denise Harrow's 15%. As of this morning, I control a 49% voting block, I said, and I have the proxy support of Dr. Aris and the trust fund. That gives me a supermajority. I am removing the cancer. Jonah, Grant is out, Malcolm is retiring. And the Rook and Feld bridge loan? Jonah asked. The one secured by your warehouse? Paid in full. I said, I walked into their office in Chicago this morning. The lien is released. The asset is clean. Jonah raised an eyebrow. That is aggressive. It is necessary. I said, I am offering you transparency. No more shell companies. No more hidden suspense accounts. I am implementing a quarterly external audit, and I am giving the bank a permanent observer seat at the board meetings. You will see every dime that moves in or out. Jonah looked at the proposal. He looked at me. He was a creature of numbers, and he knew that liquidation was messy. It yielded pennies on the dollar. A stabilized company with a transparent operator yielded interest payments for years. You are asking us to trust the person who was fired last week. Jonah noted. I am asking you to trust the person who caught the fraud that your own underwriters missed. I countered. He paused. The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile Jonah Pierce ever offered. We will draft the restated credit agreement, he said, but the interest rate goes up by 50 basis points until you produce 2 clean quarters. Done, I said. The next stop was the law firm of Klein and Surratt. Mara was waiting for me with Malcolm Weller. Malcolm looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He was sitting in a plush leather chair, but he looked like he was waiting for a bus in the rain. The fight had gone out of him. The threat of personal liability for Grant's unauthorized guarantees had terrified him into submission. The documents were laid out on the table. They were pristine, no backdated signatures, no expired notary stamps, just a clean, lawful transfer of equity. This sells my entire position to Sable Ridge and Bella Morgan, Malcolm said, his voice raspy. Yes, Mara said. At fair market value, you are getting a clean exit. Malcolm, it is more than you deserve. Malcolm picked up the pen. His hand shook slightly. I built that place, Bella, he said, looking at me. Your father and I, we built it from a garage, and then you tried to sell it for parts to save your own skin. I said gently, sign the papers. Malcolm, go enjoy your retirement. He signed. He stood up, looking at the room one last time. Grant won't accept this. Malcolm said, you know that. He thinks it is his birthright. Grant doesn't get a vote anymore. I said. Malcolm walked out. I watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of pity and relief. The old guard was gone. The path was clear. But the hardest part was not the bank, and it was not Malcolm. It was the family. I returned to the Redwood Meridian offices at 2 p.m. I had called an emergency board meeting for 3 o'clock to formalize the leadership change. When I walked into the lobby, I heard the shouting before I saw them. She is a thief. She is jealous. And she is vindictive. I froze. That wasn't Grant's voice. It was my mother's. Elaine Morgan was standing at the reception desk. Her face flushed a deep, alarming red. Grant was standing behind her, looking like a prince in exile using his mother as a shield. He had rallied her. He had gone to her, spun a story of betrayal, and brought her here to shame me into submission. Mom, I said, stepping forward. Elaine spun around. Her eyes were full of tears. How could you? She demanded, her voice cracking. Your brother finally achieves something, finally gets the recognition he deserves, and you tear it down? You buy the shares behind our backs? You threaten to fire him? She walked toward me. Her finger pointed at my chest. We raised you better than this, Bella. This is family. You don't sue family. You don't humiliate your brother. Grant stepped forward, smirking. Tell her. "Mom," Grant said, "tell her she can't just steal the company because she is mad about a title." I looked at Grant. He looked triumphant. He thought he had played the ultimate card. He thought that by invoking the sacred law of family unity, he could override the laws of fraud and finance. I looked at my mother. She was trembling. She truly believed him. She believed I was the villain. "Mom, please come with me," I said quietly. "I am not going anywhere with you," Elaine shouted. "I want you to apologize to your brother. I want you to rip up those papers. I can't do that." "Mom," I said, "then you are no daughter of mine." She spat. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The receptionist, Chloe, was staring at her monitor, pretending to be invisible. I took a deep breath. I had to break her heart to save her reality. "Come to the conference room." "Mom," I said, "I need to show you something. I am not, if you look at what I have to show you, and you still think Grant should be the partner. I will walk away." I said, "I will resign. I will give him my shares." Grant's smile faltered. "Mom, we don't need to look at her fake papers." Grant said quickly, "Let's just go see Dad." Elaine looked at me. She saw the absolute resolve in my eyes. "Show me," she whispered. We walked into the small conference room off the lobby. I laid the binder on the table. I opened it to the tab marked Vendor Fraud. I didn't shout. I didn't use emotional language. I just pointed. "This is a company called Northline Advisory." I said, "Grant approved payments of $150,000 to them in the last 3 weeks. "So?" Elaine said defensively. "Companies hire consultants." I turned the page. "This is the registration for Northline." I said, "It links to a P.O. box in Alder Creek, Indiana." I turned the page again. "And this is the filing for the company that owns that P.O. box." I continued. "It is called GM Ventures." I placed my finger on the name of the manager, Grant Morgan. Elaine stared at the paper. She blinked, trying to make the words change. "He owns it?" she asked. "He was paying himself." "Mom," I said, "he was taking money out of the company operating account and putting it into his personal shell company. He hid it from the accountants." "But why?" Elaine asked, her voice small. "Because he wanted money." I said, I turned to the next tab, the Rookenfeld Bridge loan. "And this," I said, "is a loan he took out last week, $500,000. He pledged the warehouse, the building Dad bought 30 years ago, as collateral." Elaine looked up. The warehouse? If I hadn't paid it off this morning. "Mom, they were going to foreclose tomorrow." I said, "We would have lost the building. Dad would have lost the equity." Elaine looked at Grant. He was standing by the door, his arms crossed, his face a mask of sullen petulance. "Grant?" she asked. "Is this true?" Grant rolled his eyes. "Bella is making it sound worse than it is." He scoffed. "It was leverage. I needed cash to close the deal. I was going to pay it back once the big loan came through." "You mortgaged the warehouse?" Elaine asked, her voice rising. "Without asking your father?" "I am the partner," Grant shouted. "I don't need to ask permission. I was making a play." Elaine stared at him. For the first time in her life, she didn't see the golden boy. She saw the man who had risked her husband's legacy for a quick payout. She looked back at the papers, the undeniable timeline of theft. "You stole from us," she whispered. "It wasn't stealing," Grant yelled. "It was management fees." Elaine closed the binder. She placed her hand on the cover. She looked old. She turned to me. "Do what you have to do." "Bella," she said softly. "Mom?" Grant started. "Be quiet, Grant," Elaine snapped. "Just be quiet." She walked out of the room. She didn't look back. I looked at Grant. He was staring at the empty doorway, his mouth slightly open. The shield was gone. "I will see you in the boardroom." "Grant," I said. The boardroom air was recycled and cold. Dr. Aris was there. The trust fund representative was there. Jonah Pierce was there. Grant walked in 5 minutes late. He adjusted his tie. He sat in the CEO's chair at the head of the table. He looked around the room, summoning a ghost of his usual arrogance. "Okay," Grant said, clapping his hands together. Let's get this over with. Bella has some theories she wants to share, but I want to remind everyone that I am the one who brought Rook and Feld to the table. I am the one with the vision. He leaned back, putting his feet on the base of the chair. I am the new partner, he said, and we need to focus on growth, not paperwork. It was a delusion. He was repeating the sentence like a mantra, as if saying it with enough confidence could rewrite the facts of the universe. I am the new partner. I stood up. I walked to the head of the table. Actually, Grant, I said, you are not. I placed the share transfer documents on the table. Sable Ridge Holdings and I have purchased the interest of Malcolm Weller. I said, we have also acquired the interest of Denise Harrow. Combined with my own standing, we control 64% of the voting shares of Redwood Meridian Group. Grant stared at the papers. Malcolm wouldn't sell. He muttered, he needs me. Malcolm sold. I said, he signed the papers 2 hours ago. He is gone. I turned to the board. I am calling this meeting to order as the majority shareholder. I said, the first order of business is a review of the internal investigation regarding Northline Advisory and the unauthorized encumbrance of company assets. I walked Grant through the evidence, the shell company, the bridge loan, the lies to the bank. I presented it without spectacle. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call him names. I just laid out the dates, the amounts, and the statutes violated. Jonah Pierce confirmed the bank's position. Mr. Morgan's statements to the credit committee were materially false. Jonah said, we have flagged him in the interbank fraud prevention system. Grant looked around the room. He looked for an ally. He looked at Doctor. Aris, come on. Grant said, you know me. I was just trying to move fast. Doctor. Aris looked at him with disdain. You nearly bankrupt us. Son. Doctor. Aris said, I moved to terminate Grant Morgan for cause, effective immediately. I said, seconded, said the trust fund representative. All in favor? I asked. Every hand went up, even Doctor. Aris, who hated conflict, raised his hand high. I looked at Grant. The motion carries. I said, Grant sat there. He didn't move. He looked at the chair he was sitting in. You can't do this, he whispered. I am the face of the company. Not anymore. I said. I pressed the intercom button. Security, please come to the boardroom. 2 guards walked in. They were professional, impassive. Grant, I said, you are fired. The words hung there. Simple, clean, final. I need your badge, your keys, and your company phone. I said. Grant stood up. He looked at me. His face wasn't sad. It was cold. It was a glacier of narcissism that refused to melt even in the heat of total defeat. He took his badge off and threw it on the table. He slammed his phone down. You always needed to win. Bella, he said. He said it like an accusation, like my competence was a character flaw. I didn't answer him. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say I didn't want to win. I wanted to work. I just pointed to the door. Please escort Mr. Morgan from the building. I said to the guards, do not allow him to access any computers on the way out. Grant buttoned his jacket. He smoothed his hair. He walked out with his head high, stepping into the hallway as if he were leading a parade rather than being escorted out for fraud. I watched him go. I realized then that he would never understand. He would tell the story of how his jealous sister stole his company. He would believe it until the day he died. And that was fine. I didn't need him to understand. I needed him to leave. The warehouse floor was quiet. I had stopped the line for 20 minutes. I stood on a pallet, looking out at the faces of the employees. Mateo was there, standing in the front row. Tessa from payroll was there, wiping her eyes. I didn't have a teleprompter. I didn't have a glossy speech about synergy or vision. I held a microphone that crackled slightly. Good afternoon, I said. My name is Bella Morgan. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. They knew me. They knew I had been fired. There have been a lot of rumors this week. I said, I am here to tell you the truth. I took a breath. Grant Morgan is no longer with the company. I said, Malcolm Weller has retired. As of today, I have acquired the majority control of Redwood Meridian. The silence was absolute. I know change is scary. I continued. I know you are worried about your jobs. I know you are worried about the rumors of a sale. I looked at Mateo. We are not selling. I said, we are staying right here. I have refinanced our debt with a partner who believes in what we do. The warehouse is safe. The payroll is safe. I saw shoulders drop. I saw breath being exhaled. However, I said, things are going to be different. We are bringing in external auditors next week. They are going to go through everything. If you have been cutting corners because you were told to, stop. If you have been hiding problems because you were afraid to speak up, tell us. I stepped down from the pallet. We are going back to basics. I said, we are going to build things. We are going to ship them on time. And we are going to tell the truth. I handed the microphone to Mateo. Get back to work, I said. The applause wasn't thunderous. It wasn't the cheering of a cult of personality. It was the sound of people clapping because they knew they would have a paycheck on Friday. It was a steady, rhythmic sound. It sounded like work. I sat in my new office, Grant's old office, at 6 o'clock. The sunset was painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. I had boxed up Grant's things, his golf trophies, his framed magazine covers. They were sitting by the door, waiting for a courier. Jonah Pierce knocked on the doorframe. He walked in and placed a folder on the desk. The refinance agreement, he said. Signed and executed. You have your runway. Bella, thank you. Jonah, I said. He stood there for a moment, looking at the boxes. He is going to sue you, Jonah said. I know. I said. He will sue for wrongful termination. He will sue for shareholder oppression. I opened a new spreadsheet. Project Stabilization, Week 1. I started typing. Thank you for listening to My Brother Bragged, I'm the New Partner. I bought the company and said, actually, you're fired. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the boardroom battles and family secrets of Bella Morgan. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. And if you want more tales of betrayal, justice, and the cold dish of revenge, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. Share your thoughts on Bella's decision. Did she go too far? Or was it the only way to save the legacy? I look forward to reading your comments in English. Until next time.